You're not welcome here. Oh, my daughter's fiancé yelled, ordering the security guards to kick me out of the wedding. This celebration is only for important people, he added, looking down on my modest suit. But when his father saw me and exclaimed, Leland Bradley, is it really you? The groom's whole world shook. He had no idea who I really was. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My pickup truck looked like a rust bucket parked between the Mercedes and BMW in their circular driveway. The Harrington mansion rose before me like something from a movie. Marble steps, brass fixtures gleaming in the afternoon sun, manicured hedges trimmed to perfection. I checked my watch. Exactly 2 p.m., just like Emily had asked. The front door opened before I could even reach for the doorbell. A tall man in expensive casual clothes looked me up and down with undisguised distaste. His eyes swept from my weathered work boots to my best suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for Emily's college graduation 15 years ago. You must have the wrong address, sir. This isn't a homeless shelter. Try the next street over. The words hit me like a slap. I stood frozen on their perfect doorstep, my mouth opening and closing without sound. Heat flooded my face as I tried to process what he'd just said to me. Dad, you finally made it! Emily's voice rang out from behind him, bright and warm. She appeared in the doorway wearing a flowing dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her face lit up with genuine joy as she pushed past the man, Rick, her fiancé, and threw her arms around me. Come in, come in. I've been watching for you from the window. She grabbed my arm and pulled me forward, completely oblivious to what had just happened. Rick, this is my father, Leland Bradley. Dad, meet Rick Harrington, my wonderful fiancé. Rick's expression shifted instantly, like an actor changing masks. The sneer melted into a forced smile that never reached his eyes. He extended his hand with the kind of reluctance you'd show a diseased animal. Mr. Bradley, of course. Emily's mentioned you. His handshake was brief, dismissive. Please come inside. Emily beamed between us, squeezing my arm tighter. Isn't this perfect? My two favorite men finally meeting. I managed a nod, swallowing the bitter taste in my mouth. The foyer stretched out before us like a cathedral. Crystal chandelier casting rainbows on marble floors, oil paintings in gold frames lining the walls. My reflection stared back from polished surfaces, looking small and out of place. Your home is very impressive, I said, forcing the words out. Rick straightened his shoulders, his confidence returning. Thank you. It's been in the family for 3 generations. We believe in maintaining certain standards. The emphasis on standards wasn't lost on me. Emily, still glowing with excitement, missed it entirely. Wait until you see the dining room, Dad. We're having your favorite, pot roast with mashed potatoes. Well, our chef's version of it. She laughed, linking her arm through mine. I told him you appreciate good, honest food. Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, we've adapted the menu for today. Come on, both of you. Emily pulled us toward an arched doorway. I can't wait to show Dad around before dinner. As we walked deeper into their palatial home, I caught Rick watching me in every mirror and polished surface we passed. His gaze felt like ice water down my spine, calculating and cold. Emily chattered happily about wedding plans and family histories, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. The dining room seats 24, but we'll be cozy at the small table today, she explained, leading us into a room that could have housed my entire apartment. Rick's parents are traveling, so it's just us 3. The small table was mahogany, surrounded by chairs that looked like they belonged in a museum. Place settings sparkled under another chandelier. Multiple forks, crystal glasses, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. I'd eaten my breakfast this morning off a paper plate while standing in my kitchen. Emily pulled out a chair for me. Sit here, Dad. You'll have the best view of Rick's grandmother's china collection. Rick took his place at the head of the table, his posture radiating ownership. Every movement was calculated, designed to remind me whose territory this was. The chair beneath me felt like a throne I had no right to occupy. So, Mr. Bradley, Rick began, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey, Emily tells me you're recently retired. That must be quite an adjustment. It has its moments. I kept my answer short, sensing a trap. Emily settled into her chair with a satisfied sigh. Dad worked at the same factory for 37 years. Can you imagine that kind of dedication, Rick? Indeed, I can. Rick's smile grew sharper. Loyalty is so important, isn't it? Knowing one's place, understanding where one belongs. The server appeared with the first course, some kind of soup in bowls so delicate I was afraid to touch them. Emily dove into conversation about centerpieces and seating charts, while Rick and I circled each other like wary animals. And for the reception, Emily continued, I thought we could do something fun and relaxed. Dad always says the best parties are the ones where people feel comfortable being themselves. How charming, Rick murmured, not looking charming at all, though I imagine our guest list might have different ideas about comfort. Emily gave me a tour of the main floor while Rick excused himself to check on dinner preparations. The house felt more like a museum than a home. Everything pristine, untouched, cold. She showed me the library with its leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened. The sitting room with furniture too perfect to actually sit on. Rick's grandfather started the investment firm, Emily explained, running her fingers along a marble mantelpiece. The family's built quite a legacy here in Chicago. I nodded, thinking of my own legacy. A one-bedroom apartment in Oak Park and a pickup truck that needed new brake pads. When we returned to the dining room, Rick was already seated, checking his phone. The table had been transformed with multiple courses laid out like a military formation. I counted 4 different forks beside my plate and wondered which one I was supposed to use first. I hope you're hungry, Mr. Bradley, Rick said, setting his phone aside with deliberate precision. Our chef prepared something accessible. Emily clapped her hands together. Oh, this looks amazing. Dad, you're going to love this. The pot roast bore little resemblance to anything I'd ever made. It was artfully arranged with vegetables carved into precise shapes, drizzled with sauce that probably had a French name. Emily served herself enthusiastically while Rick watched me navigate the silverware with barely concealed amusement. So tell me about the wedding budget, Rick said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. I assume you'll want to contribute something toward Emily's special day? The fork trembled slightly in my hand. Emily and I have discussed what I can manage. Of course, of course. Rick's voice dripped sympathy. I imagine retirement can be financially challenging, fixed income and all that. Emily looked up from her plate. Rick, Dad's been incredibly generous. He's giving us his savings for the honeymoon. How touching! Rick raised his wineglass in a mock toast. Every little bit helps, doesn't it? Heat crawled up my neck. I focused on cutting my food, trying to ignore the condescension dripping from every word. I was thinking about the reception venue, Emily continued, oblivious to the tension crackling between us. Something elegant but warm. Dad always says the best celebrations bring people together. Absolutely, Rick agreed, though we'll need to be thoughtful about the guest list. Some of my colleagues are quite particular about the company they keep. I set down my fork. What exactly are you trying to say? Nothing at all, Rick's smile broadened. Simply that different social circles have different expectations. I'm sure you understand your factory friends might not feel comfortable around investment bankers and politicians. Rick? Emily laughed nervously. Dad's friends are wonderful people. I'm certain they are, darling, in their own way. Rick's eyes never left mine. I just want everyone to feel appropriate. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I gripped my knife tighter, imagining how satisfying it would be to wipe that smug expression off his face. Dad has great stories about his army days, Emily said quickly, sensing the growing tension. Tell Rick about Germany, Dad. I'm sure Mr. Bradley's military experience was quite different from what we see today, Rick interrupted smoothly. Different era, different standards of service. That did it. I straightened in my chair, 37 years of manual labor evident in my broad shoulders. Different how? Rick's smile faltered slightly. Oh, I simply meant that modern military service requires a certain level of sophistication. Rick studies military history as a hobby, Emily added helpfully. He knows all about strategy and tactics. How fascinating, I said, my voice carefully level. And where did you serve? Well, I didn't actually serve, but I've read extensively on the subject. Rick's confidence wavered for just a moment. Academic study provides a much broader perspective than individual experience. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Emily looked between us with growing concern, finally recognizing that something was wrong. Maybe we should talk about something else, she suggested brightly. The weather's been lovely, hasn't it? Indeed, Rick recovered quickly. Perfect weather for outdoor weddings, though I suppose that depends on one's definition of perfect. He was like a snake, slithering around every topic, finding ways to make me feel small. Emily continued trying to steer the conversation toward safer ground, but Rick kept circling back to subtle jabs about money, class, and social standing. By the time dessert arrived, some elaborate creation that required its own special spoon, I was ready to explode. Emily chatted about flowers and music, while Rick made veiled comments about appropriate wedding attire and suitable venues for people of modest means. Well, Emily finally said, glancing at her watch, I should start getting ready for dinner with the girls tonight. Dad, thank you so much for coming. Wasn't this wonderful? I managed a smile for her sake. Wonderful. Rick stood first, extending his hand with the same reluctance as before. It's been illuminating, Mr. Bradley. I'm sure we'll see more of each other as the wedding approaches. Emily walked me to the door, chattering about next weekend's cake tasting and flower arrangements. She hugged me tight, her happiness radiating like sunshine. I'm so glad you two finally met, she whispered. I knew you'd get along. I kissed her forehead, tasting lies and good intentions. Drive carefully tonight, sweetheart. The front door closed behind me with a soft thud that sounded like a vault ceiling. I walked to my truck slowly, feeling Rick's eyes burning into my back from whatever window he was watching from. The engine turned over reluctantly, protesting the afternoon's heat. 20 minutes into the drive home, stuck in Saturday traffic on Lakeshore Drive, my phone rang. The display showed Emily's name, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. Mr. Bradley, this is Rick. Emily stepped out for a moment, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to have a man-to-man conversation. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, merging into the slow lane as traffic thickened near Lincoln Park. What do you want, Rick? I want to help you, actually. His voice carried that same oily smoothness from dinner. I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I realize we might have gotten off on the wrong foot. Is that what you call it? Look, I understand this situation is difficult for you. Emily's marrying into a different world than the one you're used to. There's no shame in that. We all have our place in society. A taxi cut in front of me, horn blaring. I let it go, focusing on Rick's words, trying to figure out his angle. At the wedding, there will be some very important people in attendance. Investors, politicians, members of Chicago's social elite. These are individuals who matter in our circles. Get to the point. The point, Mr. Bradley, is that appearances matter. I can't have Emily's father looking like he wandered in from a soup kitchen. The words hit me like a physical blow. I swerved slightly, earning an angry honk from the car beside me. Excuse me? I'm offering to help. Your suit today was quaint, but hardly appropriate for a Gold Coast wedding. I'm prepared to give you $1,000 to purchase something more suitable. Consider it an investment in Emily's happiness. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The traffic light ahead turned red, and I rolled to a stop, my hands shaking with rage. Are you listening, Mr. Bradley? $1,000 should be more than enough for a decent suit, shoes, the whole ensemble. Hell, it might be more money than you see in a month. You think I'm a beggar? I think you're a proud man who wants what's best for his daughter. Sometimes that means accepting help from those better positioned to provide it. The light changed to green. I pressed the accelerator too hard, the truck lurching forward as my temper finally snapped. Let me make something crystal clear, boy. I'm not a charity case, and I don't need your money. Now see here. No, you see here. My voice rose, filling the truck cab. I've worked every day since I was 16 years old. I raised that girl on my own after her mother died, and I did it without anyone's help, especially not from some spoiled rich kid who thinks money makes him better than everyone else. Silence stretched between us. I could practically hear Rick's shock through the phone. That girl loves you for some reason I can't fathom, I continued, my voice steady now, dangerous, so I'll play nice at your fancy wedding. But don't you ever mistake my politeness for weakness. You're making a mistake, old man. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Neither do you. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. My heart hammered against my ribs as I drove through the familiar neighborhoods of my youth. The mansions and manicured lawns of the Gold Coast gave way to smaller homes, with chain-link fences and gardens that looked lived in rather than landscaped. The adrenaline coursed through my veins like electricity. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Rick had expected me to roll over, to take his money and his insults with grateful submission. The shock in his voice when I'd fought back was worth every moment of Emily's disappointment that might follow. But would it follow? Emily loved Rick, saw something in him that I clearly missed. Maybe she saw past his arrogance to something genuine underneath. Or maybe she was blinded by his wealth and status, seduced by a life she'd never imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text message. I ignored it, focusing on the road ahead. Oak Park was only 10 minutes away now. My neighborhood, my people, my world. A world where a man's worth wasn't measured by his bank account or the thread count of his shirts. The phone buzzed again, then again. At the next red light, I glanced at the screen. 3 messages, all from unknown numbers. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Emily will choose me. I deleted them without reading them twice and dropped the phone back onto the seat. Let him send his little threats. Let him try to intimidate me with his money and connections. He'd just learned something that all his expensive education had failed to teach him. Some men don't stay down when you knock them over. The truck rumbled through the tree-lined streets of Oak Park, past the modest homes where teachers and mechanics and retirees like me lived quiet, dignified lives. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, just honest work and honest people who knew the value of both. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar creak of the garage door opening like a welcome home. For 37 years, I'd come home to this house, first with my wife, then with Emily, and now alone. But it was mine, earned with sweat and sacrifice, not inherited privilege. Rick Harrington had no idea what he'd just awakened. The anger that had felt so good during the phone call started to fade as I pulled into my driveway. My hands still trembled slightly as I turned off the engine and sat in the familiar silence of my garage. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind something heavier, lonelier. I walked past the small garden I tended myself, tomatoes and peppers in neat rows, nothing fancy but honest work. The evening air carried the scent of Mrs. Patterson's roses from next door, a reminder that normal life continued while my world tilted sideways. Inside, I hung my good suit carefully in the closet and changed into comfortable jeans and a flannel shirt. The contrast felt like shedding armor, returning to my authentic self after hours of pretending to fit into Rick's world. My front porch had always been my thinking place. The rocking chair creaked under my weight as I settled down with a cigar, the ritual as familiar as breathing. Strike the match, light carefully, first slow draw. Simple pleasures that no amount of money could improve. What the devil did Emily see in such a snob? Rick thought money solved everything, that $1,000 could buy my dignity like a suit off a rack. But Emily was smart, educated, successful in her own right. How could she be blind to his arrogance? The neighborhood settled into its Saturday evening rhythm. Mr. Chen watered his lawn across the street while his grandchildren chased fireflies. The Johnsons sat on their stoop, sharing a beer and quiet conversation. Real people living real lives, not performing for some social register. I thought about Margaret, my wife, and how she would have handled Rick's insults. She'd had a way of cutting through pretense with gentle humor, making pompous people realize their foolishness without leaving scars. Emily had inherited her mother's intelligence, but perhaps not her judgment, about character. The photos inside told our story better than any mansion could. Emily taking her first steps in our tiny kitchen, her kindergarten graduation in a borrowed dress that Margaret had hemmed 3 times, high school science fair projects spread across our dining table, college acceptance letters that brought tears to my eyes because I knew the sacrifices had been worth it. Margaret died when Emily was 15, old enough to understand loss, but young enough to need steady guidance through grief. Those years had bonded us in ways that wealthy families, with their nannies and boarding schools, might never experience. We'd been a team, father and daughter, against whatever challenges came our way, until now. Smoke drifted across the porch as evening deepened into twilight. Rick's threats echoed in my memory, but underneath his bluster, I'd heard something unexpected. Uncertainty. He'd expected me to fold immediately, to grovel gratefully for his charity. When I'd pushed back, he'd sounded almost shocked, like a bully discovering his victim had teeth. Emily's happiness mattered more than my pride, but watching her choose Rick's version of events over mine would be like losing her twice. First to his world of privilege, then to his lies about who her father really was. The streetlights flickered on as Oak Park settled into evening quiet. Children's voices faded as families gathered for dinner and television. I'd eaten countless meals alone since Margaret's death, but tonight the silence felt particularly heavy. Tomorrow Emily would call or visit, trying to smooth over what she'd undoubtedly frame as a misunderstanding. Rick would have spun his version of events, painting himself as the reasonable one trying to help a stubborn old man. She'd believe him because she wanted to believe him, because her future depended on believing him. My cigar burned down to ash as I sat watching the familiar rhythms of my neighborhood. This was my world, modest but honest, earned through decades of work and sacrifice. Rick could mock it all he wanted, but he'd never understand the satisfaction of building something real from nothing. The porch light cast long shadows as I stubbed out my cigar and stood to go inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of my resolve. But tonight, in the silence of my small home, I could still remember who I was and what I'd accomplished. Inside, the house felt emptier than usual. Family photos smiled down from every surface, capturing moments of joy that felt impossibly distant now. Emily's childhood bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it for college, a shrine to dreams I'd helped nurture into reality. I knew I'd have to tell Emily what really happened during that phone call. The question was whether she'd believe her father or her fiancé when their stories collided. Sunday morning arrived gray and restless, matching my mood after a night of tossing and turning. I'd replayed the phone conversation with Rick a dozen times, hearing his condescension grow sharper with each memory. Coffee tasted bitter in my empty kitchen as I scanned the newspaper without reading the words. Emily's car pulled into my driveway at 10:30, earlier than her usual Sunday visits. Through the window, I watched her gather her purse and lock the doors with quick, efficient movements. Her face wore the determined expression I remembered from her teenage years, when she'd set her mind to solving a problem. "Good morning, Dad," she breezed through my front door with forced cheerfulness, kissing my cheek before settling onto the couch. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I poured her coffee in the mug she'd made me in 7th grade pottery class, lopsided but treasured. "Surprised to see you so early, sweetheart." "Well, I wanted to stop by and clear up yesterday's confusion." She smoothed her skirt with nervous fingers. "Rick mentioned there might have been some kind of misunderstanding after dinner." The careful phrasing told me everything. Rick had already spun his version, probably painting himself as the patient victim of my misplaced anger. "What kind of misunderstanding did he describe?" Emily's smile wavered slightly. "He said you seemed upset during your phone conversation, maybe took something the wrong way. You know how men can be. All that pride and miscommunication." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "Emily, I need you to listen to exactly what happened yesterday." For the next 10 minutes, I walked her through Rick's phone call word by word, his condescending tone, the homeless shelter comment, the $1,000 bribe disguised as help. I watched her expression shift from confident dismissal to uncomfortable doubt to defensive anger. "Dad, that's completely different from what Rick told me." Her voice carried a note of accusation, as if I were the one lying. "He said he offered to help with wedding expenses and you got offended." $1,000 for a suit, Emily, because I looked like I'd wandered in from a soup kitchen." Those were his exact words. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking my modest garden. "Rick would never say something like that. He's not cruel." "Then one of us is lying to you." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Emily turned back to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears of frustration. "Dad, you've barely spent 2 hours with him. I've been with Rick for 8 months. I know him. He's kind, generous, thoughtful. Maybe you misunderstood his tone over the phone." "There's no misunderstanding a man calling your father a beggar, sweetheart." "He didn't call you a beggar. He was trying to help." Her voice rose with each word. Do you have any idea how much weddings cost these days? Maybe he was just being practical? I leaned back in my recliner, studying my daughter's face, the defensive flush in her cheeks, the way she avoided direct eye contact, the tremor in her voice, all signs of someone fighting to maintain a belief under assault. Emily, when have I ever lied to you? Never. But, she trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. This is different. This is about Rick, about our future together. You don't understand what it's like. Falling in love with someone amazing, building a life together. I was married to your mother for 17 years. I understand love. That was different. You and Mom were from the same background, same world. Rick and I are bridging different worlds, and that's complicated. The phrase different worlds hit me like an echo of Rick's condescension. How quickly she'd absorbed his vocabulary, his way of categorizing people into hierarchies of worth. What world am I from exactly? Emily's face crumpled with immediate regret. I didn't mean it like that, Dad. I just meant that Rick's family has certain expectations, certain standards for formal events. Standards I don't meet. No, that's not what I said. But her protest lacked conviction. Look, maybe Rick could have phrased things better, but his heart was in the right place. He wants you to feel comfortable at the wedding. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 65 years. Comfortable by accepting his charity. It's not charity when it's family helping family. I'm not his family, Emily. You are. And if he can't treat your father with basic respect, what does that tell you about how he really sees you? Her face hardened with the stubborn expression I'd seen countless times during her adolescence. Rick loves me. We're building something beautiful together, and I won't let anyone destroy that. Not even you. The words hit harder than Rick's insults. Coming from Emily, they felt like betrayal, like watching my daughter choose a stranger's lies over a lifetime of truth between us. So you believe him? I believe the man I'm going to marry, yes. She gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements. I came here hoping we could work this out, but you're determined to see the worst in Rick. And you're determined to see the best, even when he shows you otherwise. Emily paused at the door, her hand on the knob. I love you, Dad, but I love Rick too. If you can't accept that, then maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gavel. I stood in my suddenly quiet living room, listening to her car engine start and fade into the distance. For the first time in Emily's 32 years, we'd ended a conversation in anger, with words neither of us could take back. The afternoon passed in a blur of mechanical activities, cleaning an already clean house, trimming hedges that didn't need trimming, organizing tools in the garage for the third time. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind wrestled with Emily's words. By 8 o'clock, exhaustion finally drove me to my bedroom, seeking refuge in the most private corner of my world. The photographs on my dresser seemed to mock me now. Emily at 5, gap-toothed and grinning after losing her first tooth. Emily at 12, proud in her middle school graduation dress. Emily at 18, radiant in her high school cap and gown, hugging me tight while tears streamed down both our faces. Each image captured a moment when I was her hero, her protector, her trusted advisor. When had that changed? When had Rick's 8-month courtship erased 32 years of love and loyalty? I picked up my favorite photo, Emily at 25, receiving her college degree. She'd insisted I stand beside her for the family pictures, declaring loudly that none of her success would have been possible without her father's support. The pride in her voice that day had made every sacrifice worthwhile. I love you, Dad, but I love Rick too. Her words echoed through the quiet room, as if love were a zero-sum game, as if choosing Rick meant abandoning me. Margaret had taught Emily better than that. Love multiplied when shared. It didn't diminish. The weight of betrayal settled in my chest like a physical ache. Not Rick's betrayal. I'd expected nothing better from him. Emily's betrayal cut deeper because it was unthinkable. She'd chosen his lies over my truth, his version of reality over our shared history. I set down the graduation photo and picked up another, Emily at 10, standing proudly beside the vegetable garden we'd planted together after Margaret's death. We'd needed the project. needed something living and growing to anchor us during those dark months of grief. She'd insisted on planting extra tomatoes to share with the neighbors, even though money was tight. Maybe you misunderstood his tone. Her voice had carried such conviction, such certainty that her father was wrong and her fiancé was right. When had my judgment become so untrustworthy in her eyes? The bedside lamp cast warm light across decades of memories. Birthday parties in our small backyard, Christmas mornings around our modest tree, quiet evenings helping with homework at the kitchen table. Simple moments that had built an unbreakable bond between father and daughter. Or so I'd thought. Margaret's jewelry box sat on the corner of the dresser, still exactly where she'd left it 15 years ago. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay the modest engagement ring I'd bought with 3 months' factory wages. No diamonds, no gold, just a simple silver band with a tiny stone that had seemed huge to our young eyes. Emily had loved that ring as a child, had sometimes worn it on special occasions, when she was small enough for it to fit. "Someday I'll find a love like you and Mama had," she'd declared with 8-year-old certainty. Now she'd found Rick instead. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Next door, the Andersons' television murmured through thin walls. Across the street, Mr. Chen's porch light flickered with the electrical problem he'd been meaning to fix for months. Normal life continuing while my world collapsed, one conversation at a time. I thought about calling Emily, trying to bridge the gap that had opened between us. But what words could repair her faith in Rick or restore her trust in me? She'd made her choice with the clarity of absolute certainty. The worst part wasn't losing the argument about Rick's character. The worst part was realizing that my daughter, the girl I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, truly believed I was capable of lying about something so important, that my jealousy or stubbornness could drive me to slander her future husband with invented cruelties. Outside my window, Oak Park settled into Sunday evening quiet. Children had been called inside for baths and bedtime stories. Parents sat on front porches, sharing the day's small victories and defeats. Families intact, bonds unbroken. I placed the photos back on the dresser, all except one, Emily's graduation picture, the last time I'd felt unquestionably important in her life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of whatever relationship we had left. But tonight, holding that single photograph, I made a decision. Emily could choose Rick's version of events. She could believe his lies about my character and his sanitized version of his own, but I wouldn't disappear quietly into the background of her life. Rick Harrington had started this war with his arrogance and his $1,000 bribes. He'd underestimated a factory worker's pride and a father's love. Now he would learn that some battles couldn't be won with money or social connections. I set the graduation photo on my nightstand where I could see it first thing in the morning, a reminder of what I was fighting for and why surrender had never been an option. Monday dragged by with the weight of unfinished business. I'd spent the day working in my garden, repairing a loose fence board, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind processed Sunday's confrontation with Emily. By evening I felt steadier, more like myself than I had in days. The phone rang while I was finishing a simple dinner of leftover pot, roast, and mashed potatoes. Emily's name appeared on the display, and for a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe she'd had time to think, to reconsider Rick's version of events. "Mr. Bradley?" Rick's voice cut through my expectations like a blade. "We need to have another man-to-man conversation." The presumption in his tone set my teeth on edge, using Emily's phone like it was his own, calling me in my own home as if he had every right. "What do you want now, Rick?" "I want to clear up this unfortunate situation before it gets out of hand." His voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. "Emily told me about your conversation yesterday. Frankly, I'm disappointed." I set down my fork and straightened in my chair. Disappointed in what, exactly? "In your stubborn refusal to accept reality. Emily's happiness means everything to me, and your wild accusations are putting stress on the woman I love." "Wild accusations?" I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting the condescension in it. "Is that what you're calling the truth?" "Mr. Bradley, let me be crystal clear about something. If you don't stop spreading these lies about me, I'll make sure you don't appear at the wedding at all." The threat hung in the air between us like smoke from a gun barrel. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Then something hard and cold settled in my chest, something I hadn't felt since my army days. "Are you threatening me, boy?" "I'm explaining the consequences of your actions. Emily loves me, she trusts me, and she believes me. If you force her to choose between her father and her future husband, how do you think that's going to end?" My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. "You're out of line." "Am I? You're embarrassing Emily with these wild stories about homeless shelters and charity money. She's starting to think her own father has lost touch with reality." The calculated cruelty in his words was breathtaking. He wasn't just threatening me. He was systematically destroying my relationship with my daughter, turning my honesty into evidence of mental instability. "Listen carefully, Rick." My voice dropped to a register I hadn't used in years, carrying the authority of a man who'd faced real threats and survived them. "You can play your games with Emily because she loves you, but if you hurt her, if you break her spirit with your arrogance and control, you'll regret it." For the first time since I'd known him, Rick seemed caught off guard. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining the consequences of your actions." I threw his own words back at him with cold precision. "Emily's my daughter. I raised her, protected her, loved her when she had nobody else. That bond doesn't disappear just because some spoiled rich kid thinks he owns her." "You're living in the past, old man. Emily has a new life now, a better life, with people who can actually provide for her." "Money isn't everything, son. Sometimes a man's worth is measured by how he treats people who can't fight back. And sometimes a man's worth is measured by what he can actually accomplish in the world." Rick's voice hardened with renewed confidence. "Emily knows which one of us has more to offer." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every one of my 65 years and the strength that came with them. "We'll see about that. Yes, we will. And when we do, I think you'll find that Emily makes the smart choice. She always has." The line went dead, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the phone buzzing in my hand, like an angry wasp. But instead of the rage I'd felt after our first confrontation, I felt something different now. Clarity, purpose, the calm that comes before decisive action. Rick had made two critical mistakes. First, he'd assumed that threatening me would make me back down. Second, he'd revealed just how confident he was in his control over Emily. That kind of arrogance made men careless, made them believe their own lies about being untouchable. I set the phone down with steady hands and returned to my dinner. The pot roast tasted better than it had in weeks. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt like myself again. Not the victim of Rick's psychological warfare, but the man who'd raised Emily Bradley to be strong and independent. Tomorrow, I'd start handling this wedding business properly. Rick wanted to play games about appearances and social standing. Fine, but he just reminded me that some battles required more than defensive postures. The graduation photo on the counter caught the light from my kitchen window. Emily's smile as bright as ever. She'd chosen Rick's side for now, but the war was far from over. Time to show that smug banker what a real man looked like. Tuesday afternoon found me standing in the parking lot of Westfield Shopping Center, staring at the modest storefronts of suburban commerce. I'd driven past 3 downtown menswear shops on my way here, the kind of places where Rick probably bought his suits, where salespeople would size up my truck and treat me accordingly. This was different. Murphy's Men's Clothing had been serving middle-class Chicago for 30 years, according to the faded sign above the door. The kind of place where teachers and supervisors bought suits for their daughters' weddings without taking out loans. The bell chimed as I entered, drawing the attention of a gray-haired man arranging ties behind the counter. His eyes took in my work clothes and weathered hands without judgment, just professional assessment. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "I need a suit. Wedding in June. Formal occasion." I kept my voice steady, matter of fact. Something appropriate, but not flashy. He nodded as if I'd passed some unspoken test. "Special occasion suits are our specialty. What's your budget range?" The directness surprised me. No dancing around the subject. No assumptions about what I could or couldn't afford. $400, maybe $5 if it's worth it. "We can definitely work with that." Follow me." 20 minutes later, I stood before a three-way mirror, wearing a charcoal gray suit that transformed my reflection into someone I barely recognized. The cut followed my shoulders without pulling. The trousers broke perfectly over my dress shoes. The fabric felt substantial, real, not the synthetic nonsense that filled discount racks. "That's a good choice." The salesman, his name tag read, Frank, stepped back to assess the fit. "Classic style, never goes out of fashion. You'll wear this suit for years." I turned slightly, examining myself from different angles. The man in the mirror looked dignified, respectable, like someone who belonged at elegant gatherings. Not the factory worker Rick saw when he looked at me, but not a costume either. Just me, dressed for the occasion. "How much?" "$380 for the suit, another $40 for basic alterations. You'll need it when?" "Wedding's in June, first Saturday." Frank made notes on his tablet. "Plenty of time. We'll have it ready by Friday, give you the weekend to make sure everything's perfect." As he wrote up the order, I found myself thinking about Emily's graduation day. She'd been so proud walking across that stage, and I'd been proud to be her father. The cheap suit I'd worn that day had seemed elegant enough then, surrounded by other working-class families celebrating their children's achievements. But Rick's world operated by different rules. Appearance mattered not for its own sake, but as a weapon in social warfare. He'd tried to disarm me with his charity offer, to make me dependent on his generosity for basic dignity. Instead, I was paying my own way with money I'd earned through honest work. The difference might seem subtle to an outside observer, but it meant everything to me. "You want the receipt?" Frank held out the carbon copy. "Please." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my wallet next to Emily's graduation photo. $420. More than I'd spent on clothes in the past 3 years combined, but worth every penny for what it represented. As I walked back to my truck carrying the suit bag, I felt a confidence I hadn't experienced since this whole mess began. Rick had tried to diminish me by attacking my appearance, my social standing, my worth as Emily's father. But dignity couldn't be bought or sold. It came from within, from knowing who you were and standing by your principles. The drive home took me through the familiar neighborhoods of my youth, past houses where honest people lived, honest lives. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, just the quiet satisfaction of work well done and families held together by love rather than money. I hung the suit carefully in my bedroom closet, next to my Sunday clothes and the navy blazer I'd worn to every important event in Emily's life. Come June, I'd walk into that Gold Coast wedding looking like I belonged there. Not because Rick had granted me permission, but because Emily was my daughter, and no amount of money could change that. Rick thought he'd won this battle by turning Emily against me, by making her question my honesty and judgment. But battles weren't wars, and wars weren't won by the side with the most money. They were won by the side with the most determination. June couldn't come fast enough. Rick wanted to see what I was really made of. He'd get his chance soon enough. Over the following weeks, Rick's confidence grew like weeds in untended soil. The pattern emerged clearly during our monthly family dinners, each gathering more uncomfortable than the last as he tested the boundaries of acceptable rudeness. Late April brought our first post-suit encounter at an upscale steakhouse Rick had chosen. When I arrived wearing my new charcoal gray suit, his eyebrows rose slightly. Surprise quickly masked by renewed calculation, Emily beamed at my improved appearance, chattering about how handsome I looked, while Rick studied me like a chess player, reevaluating his opponent's pieces. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Bradley," he said with studied casualness. "Emily mentioned you have old-fashioned views about modern celebrations. I hope you'll find our wedding appropriately traditional." The emphasis on traditional carried layers of meaning, all of them condescending, but I simply nodded and complimented Emily's choice of restaurant, refusing to take the bait. Early May brought Mother's Day dinner with Emily's college friends and their families. Rick performed for the larger audience, casually mentioning his graduate school network and the caliber of people who'd be attending the wedding. Each comment was a subtle reminder that I didn't belong in such company, that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. "I trust you understand we'll have some very prominent guests," he said during coffee, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby tables to hear. Investment partners, political figures, people who matter in Chicago society. Emily laughed nervously. Rick, Dad's been to plenty of formal events. Remember my college graduation ceremony? Of course, Rick smiled with razor precision, though I imagine university events have a different atmosphere than private society gatherings. I sipped my coffee and watched him work, marveling at the calculated nature of each insult. He never said anything Emily could definitively call cruel, but the message was clear. Her father was out of his league and everyone knew it. Mid-May brought wedding planning sessions that felt more like military briefings. Rick had charts and schedules, vendor contracts and guest list hierarchies. Everything organized with corporate efficiency, including my role as father of the bride. A title he made sound like a ceremonial appointment, rather than a biological fact. I've arranged for you to be seated at table 12, he announced during one particularly detailed session. It's perfectly positioned. You'll have an excellent view of the ceremony without being central to the photographs. Emily frowned. Rick, shouldn't Dad be in the family photos? Of course. The formal portraits, absolutely. I just meant the candid shots during dinner, the ones that might end up in magazines or society pages. We want to be thoughtful about presentation. The translation was clear. I'd be hidden from public view while wealthy guests enjoyed premium seating and photo opportunities. But I nodded agreeably, even suggesting that table 12 sounded perfect. My reaction seemed to puzzle Rick, who'd clearly expected more resistance. By late May, his arrogance had reached breathtaking heights. During our final pre-wedding dinner, he actually pulled out his phone to show Emily photos from previous Gold Coast weddings, pointing out the elegant guest attire and sophisticated atmosphere. This is the standard we're aiming for, he explained, swiping through images of tuxedoed men and designer-gowned women. Everyone who matters in Chicago society will be watching how we handle this celebration. Emily studied the photos with growing anxiety. It all looks very formal. Formal, but not stuffy, Rick assured her, though I do hope everyone understands the importance of appropriate presentation. We can't have anyone feeling out of place or uncomfortable. He glanced at me pointedly as he said it, and I nodded with apparent understanding. Inside, I marveled at his complete lack of self-awareness. He'd become so comfortable with his psychological dominance that he'd stopped being careful, stopped maintaining the pretense of basic respect. Perfect. The wedding was only days away now, and Rick had revealed his true character completely, not just to me, but to anyone willing to look past his polished surface. Emily's stress had grown with each gathering, her attempts at mediation becoming more desperate as the tension between her father and fiancé became impossible to ignore. But she still believed Rick's version of events, still trusted that her father was the problem and her future husband was simply trying to maintain standards. Love had blinded her to obvious truths, just as Rick had calculated it would. Soon that would change. Very soon. I was ready for whatever June would bring. Ready to show Rick Harrington and his Gold Coast friends exactly what kind of man they'd been dismissing. The suit hanging in my closet was just the beginning. The real surprise would come when Rick discovered that some battles couldn't be won through money and social connections. Emily deserved better than a man who thought love meant control, who measured worth through bank statements rather than character. Come Saturday, she'd finally see Rick's true colors displayed for everyone to witness. The countdown had begun. Saturday arrived with perfect June sunshine, the kind of day that made Chicago sparkle like a postcard. I drove my pickup truck through the Gold Coast district, past mansions that could house entire Oak Park blocks, toward the Drake Hotel where Emily's wedding would unfold. The hotel's limestone facade rose before me like a fortress of privilege, its brass fixtures gleaming in the afternoon light. Luxury cars lined Michigan Avenue, Bentleys, Mercedes, Jaguars, while uniformed valets guided them into position with practiced efficiency. My weathered truck looked like a survivor from another era among such automotive nobility, but I felt different than I had months ago. The new suit transformed my reflection in the pickup's mirror into someone who belonged anywhere dignity mattered. The charcoal gray fabric followed my shoulders with quiet authority, the proper cut lending weight to my bearing. I'd earned this moment through months of strategic patience. The afternoon ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock, with guests already arriving in clusters of expensive fabric and polished leather. Women in designer dresses that cost more than my monthly pension laughed with practiced charm, while men in custom suits discussed market trends and political connections. This was Rick's world, all surface and performance, wealth displayed like military decorations. I walked toward the hotel entrance with steady purpose, neither hurried nor hesitant. The doorman's eyes registered my approach with professional assessment, noting the quality of my suit, if not its modest price point. For a moment, I thought I might simply blend into the elegant crowd and find my assigned seat without incident. Then Rick appeared. He materialized from behind a pillar near the entrance, positioned deliberately to intercept my approach. His wedding attire was flawless. Morning coat, striped trousers, silk tie that probably cost more than my entire outfit. But his expression carried the familiar mixture of surprise and calculating displeasure I'd come to know so well. "Well, well," he said, his voice pitched just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Look what the wind blew in!" Other wedding attendees slowed their approach, sensing drama developing. Rick had chosen his moment carefully, public enough to demonstrate his power, formal enough to make any response from me seem inappropriate. "Good afternoon, Rick," I replied evenly. "Beautiful day for a wedding." "Indeed it is." His smile carried all the warmth of winter steel. "Though I have to say, despite the obvious effort you've made with your appearance, you still look rather out of place. This celebration is for respectable people." The insult landed with surgical precision, delivered with enough social polish that casual observers might mistake it for misguided concern. But the message was unmistakable. I didn't belong here, never would belong here, and everyone should know it. "I dressed my best," I said quietly, "for my daughter." "Your daughter will be fine without you. In fact, she'll be better off." Rick gestured subtly, and two security guards moved closer from their positions near the hotel pillars. "I think it's time for you to leave." The guards approached with professional courtesy but unmistakable intent. They were good men doing their jobs, following the instructions of their employer's family. One placed a firm but respectful hand on my shoulder. "Sir, we'll need to ask you to come with us," the senior guard said apologetically. Rick stood watching with barely contained satisfaction, his moment of absolute triumph finally arriving. 2 months of psychological warfare had led to this. The public humiliation of Emily's father on her wedding day, witnessed by Chicago's social elite. He'd won completely, or so he believed. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. Wait a minute. The voice carried authority and confusion in equal measure. "Is that you? The same Leland Bradley?" I turned slowly, recognizing the voice even before I saw the face. 55 years collapsed in an instant as Victor Harrington approached through the crowd of wedding guests, his formal attire impeccable, but his expression one of growing amazement. "Victor," I said simply, watching recognition dawn in his eyes like sunrise after a long night. He stopped 3 feet away, studying my face with the intensity of a man confirming a miracle. Time had changed us both, his hair silver now, my face more weathered. But some things transcended decades. The way a man carried himself, the set of his shoulders, the look in his eyes. The same Leland Bradley who saved my life during the rocket attack outside Saigon, March 15th, 1970. The security guard's hand fell away from my shoulder. Rick's confident smile began to waver as he watched his father's emotional reaction to a man he'd just ordered, removed from the premises. "That was me," I confirmed, feeling the weight of 55 years of unspoken gratitude suddenly filling the space between us. Victor's eyes filled with tears he made no attempt to hide. In front of Chicago's social elite, this powerful businessman broke down like the 23-year-old lieutenant I'd pulled from a burning jeep half a century ago. "I've been looking for you," he whispered, then louder, "I've been looking for you for 55 years. The wedding guests formed a respectful circle around us, sensing something profound unfolding. Rick stood frozen at the edge of the group, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror as he began to understand the magnitude of his error. "Dad, what's happening?" Rick's voice cracked slightly. "This man is just a factory worker, nobody important." Victor whirled on his son with an expression I'd seen once before, when he was a young officer discovering his sergeant had abandoned wounded men under fire. Nobody important? Victor's voice carried across the hotel entrance. This man crawled through rocket fire to pull me from a burning vehicle. He carried me to safety while explosions tore apart everything around us. He saved my life when he could have saved himself. The story poured out of him like water through a broken dam. How the Viet Cong had ambushed our convoy, how his jeep had taken a direct hit and burst into flames, how I'd seen him trapped inside and made the split-second decision that defined both our lives. I was unconscious, trapped by twisted metal. Victor continued, his voice breaking. Leland Bradley risked everything to get me out. The ammunition in that jeep started cooking off 30 seconds after he pulled me clear. 30 seconds. Rick's face had gone completely white. The wedding guests stared at him with a mixture of shock and disgust, finally understanding the kind of man who would humiliate a war hero at his own daughter's wedding. "Sir," the security guard said quietly, "should we—" "Stand down," Victor ordered, never taking his eyes off his son. "This man is my guest. He's my honored guest." Victor stepped forward and embraced me with the fierce gratitude of a man who'd carried a debt for more than half his life. Around us, Chicago's social elite witnessed something they rarely saw in their carefully managed world. Authentic emotion, real honor, genuine heroism. "I tried to find you after the war," Victor said, still gripping my shoulders. "The Army records were incomplete. Soldiers scattered to the wind. I hired investigators, searched veteran organizations. I never stopped looking." "I never needed thanks," I replied, meaning it. "We were soldiers. We looked after each other. But I needed to give them." Victor turned back to his son, his voice dropping to a register that carried absolute authority. "Richard, what exactly have you done to this man?" Rick stammered something about misunderstandings and different social backgrounds, but his father's expression stopped him cold. The wedding guests continued watching in stunned silence as the truth unfolded before them. "This man," Victor announced to the crowd, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a lifetime in business and command, "is the reason I'm alive today, the reason my son exists, the reason this wedding is happening at all." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Rick had just tried to humiliate the man responsible for his very existence, had called security to remove the hero who'd made his privileged life possible. Victor wiped tears from his eyes and turned to his son with a mixture of disappointment and growing anger. "Richard, I think you and I need to have a very serious conversation about honor, gratitude, and what it means to be a Harrington." Rick's desperate apologies began immediately, each word dripping with the panic of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "Mr. Bradley, I'm so sorry. Please come inside. You should be at the head table. You should be honored." But I held up my hand, stopping his frantic attempts at damage control. The wedding guests watched in fascination as the social order they understood, completely, inverted before their eyes. "No thank you, son," I said with quiet dignity. "This is your wedding, your celebration. You handle it however you see fit." Victor stepped closer, understanding immediately. "Leland, would you join me for a drink somewhere more comfortable? We have 55 years to catch up on." "That sounds perfect." I turned to face Rick one last time, seeing him clearly for what he was. Not a powerful man commanding respect, but a frightened boy who'd just learned the difference between wealth and worth. Take care of Emily. Make her happy. That's all that matters. The walk to O'Leary's Irish pub took us 3 blocks from the Drake Hotel's marble and crystal elegance into a world of weathered wood and authentic conversation. The contrast felt like stepping from a museum into someone's living room. Real instead of performed, genuine instead of calculated. We settled into a corner booth with pints of beer that cost less than the Drake's appetizers. Victor had loosened his formal tie, and I had removed my suit jacket. 2 old soldiers finding their comfort zone after decades of different paths. "So you became a factory worker," Victor said, genuine interest in his voice. 37 years, Rick mentioned. "Good, honest work. Raised my daughter, bought my house, lived my life." I sipped the beer and smiled. No complaints. "And I became everything my father wanted. Businessman, social climber, member of all the right clubs." Victor's expression grew thoughtful. But I never forgot that day outside Saigon. Never forgot the man who saved my life while rockets fell around us like rain. We talked for 2 hours, sharing stories of marriages and children, successes and losses. Victor spoke of building his father's investment firm into something bigger, of the pressure to maintain social standing and family legacy. I told him about Margaret's death, about raising Emily alone, about the simple satisfactions of honest work and modest achievements. I envied you sometimes, Victor admitted as the afternoon light slanted through the pub's windows, reading about factory workers and their unions, their sense of solidarity. You built something real, community, genuine relationships. And you built something impressive, I replied. Success, security, opportunity for your family. But at what cost? Victor's voice carried regret. Look at my son. All privilege and no character. He nearly destroyed the wedding of the daughter of the man who saved his father's life. What does that say about how I raised him? Outside, Chicago hummed with weekend energy. Inside, two men who'd shared the worst and best of human nature found themselves grateful for both the reunion and the perspective it provided. Rick's young, I said eventually. Young people make mistakes. The question is whether they learn from them. Emily seems like a remarkable woman. Strong, intelligent, independent. She must get that from her father. I thought about Emily back at the Drake Hotel, probably wondering why her father and future father-in-law had disappeared together. She'd learn the truth eventually, about Rick's cruelty and my patient endurance, about the military connection that changed everything. She'll be fine, I said with certainty. Emily's smart enough to figure out who Rick really is, and now she'll have you watching out for her too. Victor raised his glass in a toast, to second chances, old friendships, and the wisdom that comes from surviving our own mistakes. We drank to that, two veterans who'd found each other again after 5 decades. The afternoon sun slanted lower through the pub windows, painting everything in golden light that felt like benediction. Outside, Rick's elaborate wedding continued without us. Inside O'Leary's, something more valuable was happening. Genuine connection between men who understood the difference between what money could buy and what life actually offered. Some battles were worth fighting. Some victories were worth waiting for. And sometimes, justice arrived exactly when it was supposed to, wearing the face of an old friend who'd never forgotten a debt of honor. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.